Hello, my name is Paul Marchbanks, and this is Digging in the Dirt. Today I'm going to talk about why some storytellers choose to put the word sin in the title of their work. Specifically, I'll say a few words about the first season of limited series The Sinner and Ryan Coogler's film Sinners. With his first foray into horror, the director of Marvel's Black Panther films and the Creed boxing trilogy tackles a different kind of hero, a pair of criminal anti-heroes whose power is built on violence, greed, and deceit. Are they simply unregenerate evildoers who deserve the label slapped on them by the film's title? Or does Coogler's original screenplay employ the word ironically? Does he wish us to question and perhaps discard the idea of sin? Was the film released on Good Friday to either endorse or undercut the idea that humans need saving by some force beyond themselves? When I was in 11th grade, my U.S. literature teacher had our class read Jonathan Edwards' Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, a famous sermon from the Great Awakening period of the Protestant Church. Built on a verse in Deuteronomy that describes God as an avenger ready to repay the evildoer with disaster, this piece of 18th century rhetoric exemplifies the infamous phrase, hellfire and brimstone. Edwards mentions grace and mercy sparingly in his message, tying them to the present dire moment in the most distressing altar call imaginable. Love comes up only 3 times. Once, to pair the excellence of God's love with the dreadfulness of divine wrath, and another time to cast human love and hatred aside as equally despicable. Only once does he mention the blessed, full hearts of believers who have embraced the love of the one who washes away their sin with his own blood. Edwards builds his exhortation atop the presumption that fear of hell will do more to draw seekers to faith than descriptions of the peace and hope accompanying redemption. The high school teacher of mine who assigned the sermon was a very dynamic, inspiring instructor who pushed me to read more closely, write more carefully, and get excited about types of literature in which I had no native interest. Together with my British literature teacher the following year, she stoked a passion for analysis that helped land me where I am today. She also taught my high school drama class and directed a number of wonderful plays at the Oak Ridge Community Theater that helped draw this introvert out of himself on stage. Playing Templeton the Rat in her production of Charlotte's Web was particularly memorable. I owe her quite a bit. At the same time, the atmosphere of inquiry she fostered had a decidedly secular bent. I can't recall any lessons or class exercises exploring the possibility that the God imperfectly described by Edwards' sermon might actually exist. As best I recall, our analysis of Edwards' harangue targeted his use of pathos, an over-reliance on scare tactics to frighten the uncertain listener into making a public decision hard to renege on later. We also read the autobiographical short story Salvation by Langston Hughes, an excerpt from his memoir, which similarly criticizes the use of communal pressure in a worship environment. The spiritual dimension of these 2 fictional preachers' sermons and the concept of sin itself took a backseat to consideration of their rhetorical strategies and the social dimensions of such sermons. In this, my teacher's class prepared me well for the study of literature in higher education, an environment that customarily fosters a brand of intellectual enlightenment dismissive of the supernatural. I do my best to mix things up a bit in my own literature classroom. I teach texts like the Communist Manifesto by the irreligious Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels alongside poems by Christian social activists including Elizabeth Barrett Browning and Christina Rossetti, and pair compelling modernist novels by unrepentant atheists like Virginia Woolf with short stories by the staunch Catholic Flannery O'Connor. Whenever I teach James Joyce's A Portrait of the Artist as a young man, which explores the psychological damage done to a teenager by yet another fire and brimstone sermon, this one delivered by a Catholic priest, I try to tackle the ideological issues involved from multiple angles. Such even-handedness is a bit easier when a story invites discussion of the supernatural by placing the word sin in its very title. Even when the tale's creator deploys the word sarcastically, its presence asks the audience to at least consider the validity of a concept commonly deconstructed by those who are convinced that psychotherapy and behavioral conditioning alone can fix most of our personal problems. At first glance, the television series The Sinner appears to be doing this very thing, deconstructing Christianity by setting up an easy target, a devout but rather histrionic mother convinced that God is a killjoy who only blesses those who mortify their flesh. After a couple episodes, we assume that the law-abiding central character who committed an inexplicable murder in the opening act has been warped by her Catholic upbringing. Flashbacks reveal Cora's tyrannical mother telling the young child that the medical impact of her little sister's lymphoma can be lessened by not only regular prayer, but a very strict ascetic lifestyle for herself. If Cora can manage to resist all pleasure in life, including eating the sweets secretly given her by her aunt, then maintains her mother, God may lessen her sister's suffering. Quote, I know it's hard, but we can't give him reasons to punish us. One bite of this chocolate, and he could take Phoebe's life. The portrait of faith handed us is unsurprisingly twisted, suggesting not that Christ encourages delight and freedom from the weight of sin, but that faith is a dead weight intended to drown both autonomy and the sensuous life. At least, that's the takeaway if we ignore the gradual introduction of a secondary character and fellow prisoner who, unlike Cora, has not turned her back on God. In her first scene, this unnamed convict leads a circle of women as they pray through the lyrics to the hymn, Just as I Am, Without One Plea, and then concludes with a Hail Mary prayer. When Cora later rebuffs her attempt at friendship, the woman retreats, only to try again later. Cora joins the prayer circle halfway through the series as the leader asks God to remove their, quote, fear, anxiety, and stress. Then thanks him for protecting their families while they're in prison, quote, allowing them to fix their eyes on you and hope for the future, a hope found in Christ. In a moment that shocked me when I first saw it, nestled as it was between torturous depictions of the lead detective's sadomasochistic encounters with a prostitute and flashbacks in which the sick Phoebe encourages Cora to whore herself out so that her bedridden sister can vicariously experience intimacy, I say again, in this surprising moment, Cora's new incarcerated friend observes that if all God brought was pain in Cora's youth, then she was talking to the wrong God. She herself had left meth addiction and a habit of identity theft behind when God told her to stop beating herself up, to confess her sin, and surrender. In The Sinner, then, a minor character's presence supplies a counter-cultural perspective that takes sin seriously while granting even more weight to God's grace. Ryan Coogler's film Sinners veers decidedly in the opposite direction, doing its best to question traditional constructions of sinfulness. Though the film does introduce a few characters who have a conventional sense of morality, including a female expert in voodoo who's unwilling to take her criminal husband's blood money. Her prayers have been safeguarding her husband and his twin during their 7 years as gangsters in Chicago. When later her husband removes the protective juju bag she made for him, he's mortally wounded within seconds. And a few Native Americans comfortable with using the label evil also show up, briefly, and try to protect some white homesteaders by explaining that the man they've just taken into their home isn't what he seems. When they're shooed away, they wish God's protection on the couple, which is about to be turned into bloodsuckers by their vampiric guest. Ultimately, however, the film comes down on the side of the vampires, the criminals, and a juvenile adulterer who turns his back on his father's faith. Coogler's implicit argument is that supposedly sinful behaviors provide a necessary release valve to help marginalized people let off some steam, create community, and explore their dreams. Smokes and Stack, twin brothers who return in 1932 to Clarksdale, Mississippi with itchy trigger fingers and piles of ready cash, use their newfound power to reestablish themselves in their hometown and quickly set up a juke joint for nighttime festivities. They unknowingly purchase a slaughterhouse, advertised as a mill, from a businessman who is secretly leader of the local KKK, hire a couple gifted musicians, and set about to earn their fortune. That they made their seed money stealing from rival gangs and leaving those gangs to start a war with each other, shoot a couple old acquaintances in the legs to make a point on their first day, and explain the art of cunnilingus to a teenager presumably matters less than their brotherly love for each other and the fact that their success is made in the teeth of a racist majority. This latter point is echoed by Remick, an Irish vampire whose singing and dancing skills rival those of the blues musicians hired by the twins. He may kill hordes of innocents in bloody fashion, but Remick just wants to create community, fellowship for the disenfranchised. He suggests that the African Americans in the Mississippi Delta suffer from the same kind of marginalization as vampires. He offers intimate connection, an alternate form of eternity from that offered by the church, whose teachings he directly rejects, and a love of music equal to that of the black folk who, newly made into vampires, join him in an Irish jig. Okay, be warned, I'm about to share spoilers that take us right to the film's conclusion. The teenager I mentioned is the only one to survive the vampire incursion without being turned. Flash forward 60 years, and he observes that while that one night of death and destruction still gives him nightmares, this remembered horror just makes the present more piquant by contrast. His life as an elderly, successful blues musician in Chicago owes everything to his embracing the blues and rejecting the church. Coogler has set up a false binary that rejects the possibility of Christian blues singers, instead forcing young Sammy to choose between faith and artistic expression. The morning of the doomed shindig, his father, a pastor, asks his son to help with an upcoming sermon by practicing the oral delivery of 1 Corinthians 10:13. Sammy begins by reading the passage from the Big Bible on the pulpit, a passage about God's promise to always provide an open exit from temptation. And Sammy wraps up by reciting the last part of the passage from memory. His subsequent actions suggest, however, that he'd rather not take this particular exit. He instead helps his cousin collect another musician for the evening's party at the new juke joint, entertains the patrons with piercingly beautiful music, courtesy of his guitar and vocal cords, and as a reward for his labors, has an adulterous encounter with a woman who left her husband at home. Sammy is merely following the lead of his cousin Stack, who has also been intimate with a married woman recently, dispensed sex advice earlier that day, and now chuckles as he listens to moaning inside a locked door. The film's messaging appears most clearly in the song I Lied to You, performed by actor-singer Miles Caton, whose lyrics explain that Sammy needs to stop pretending to be one of the faithful so that he can express himself through the blues and apparently illicit sex. The refrain, "Somebody take me in your arms tonight," says it all. Sammy's not overly particular, he just wants out of the constraints religion imposes on him. And engaging in what his father would consider sin is a pretty clear way to do this. What do you think? Does Christianity, as you understand it, offer a promise to suffocate desire and stifle self-expression? Or do you find in Jesus' promise to make all things new an invitation worth embracing?